glad you're here tonight, and tell everybody online, welcome. It's good to see such a big crowd here. So I wanted to start off by introducing you to Ken Bowman, who's one of our board members, who has been kind enough to sponsor tonight's class. Would you guys give him a round of applause? Thank you, sir. A ton of work has gone into tonight's class, and I'm just thrilled after talking to our speaker several times. I can't wait to hear the class and hear what he has to say. So last night we had anybody here was anybody here at the class last night? Thanks for coming back. So we are so lucky because 2 nights in a row, the voice of Empower You is here. And I was wondering if you guys would mind if he sang the Star Spangled Banner for you. Would you guys be okay with that? Okay, that is Don Hurd, the voice of Empower You. The incredible Don Hurd. Thank you, Don.
Thank you. Please stand. If you're able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. As always. Just a few things before we get started. So I made a big mistake last night. I forgot to introduce the incredible group of people that help us put Empower You on. So I wanted to say hello to them. In the back, Jill is not always here with us. She's our operations manager of Empower You, but she decorated the studio tonight. Let's thank her for that. It looks pretty cool. We've got our treasurer, Bill Roll, in the back. Let's thank him. I thought Bill was going to have to be a bouncer last night, but everything turned out all right, and he didn't have to flex his muscle. But I don't know, he put to the task. He was ready, I think. And we've got Jay Grunke, who's our producer. Let's thank him. And our executive director is Betty Overstreet. Let's thank her, too. So Empower You was started 8.5 years ago. Tonight, I think, is our 321st class that we've taught. For those of you who haven't been with us, I know Mr. Doolin's been with us because he did a great class about a year ago. Let's give this guy a round of applause right here. It's so good to see you. Thank you for coming. But we started Empower You with a simple idea that we wanted to empower people to do great things in their lives. And we wanted to do that by helping give you education on things, on great topics. Like tonight, what could be more empowering than people saving the country? And to do fun things too, because life can't always be serious. And to go out in the communities and get engaged in issues that are important and that matter. And you know, it's funny because in the last 2 nights, we've had our 2 largest attendance classes ever. And that's a great thing. So give yourselves a round of applause. We're glad to see you here. I just have 2 classes I wanted to talk to you about. I've got one other thing. Empower You has sponsored our friend Sean Maloney from the the NRA with his NRA The Future Freedom program, and we purchased 2 tickets to his Butler County Friends of the NRA that we would love to give to anybody who's interested. If you are interested in that, you could see me after the event, and I'd love to give these 2 tickets to someone. Hopefully we won't get into any war over them or anything, but I'd love to give them away. 2 classes I wanted to tell you about next Tuesday, a week from tonight. A lifelong friend of mine who I lost track of for 50 years from Fort Wayne, Indiana, wrote this book called Child of the Forest. His name is Jack Grossman. He's coming from North Carolina, and this is an incredible story about a young woman who survived 2 years trying to evade the Nazis in Germany. And Jack is going to come and have a discussion with us about the Holocaust and all the Holocaust nevers that are out there and what he thinks about that. And I promise you, this will be a fascinating night. So hope you'll consider coming to that. Jack will be signing books that night. And then on the 30th of April, I'm trying to think what night of the week that is.
Tuesday.
Tuesday night. Well, we're going to drink beer over at the West Side Brewery, which is, yeah, let's go. I like it. I might be able to get my friend Randy Green to join me for that one. It's a great brewery, and it's kind of a different subject, but I've got to tell you, I'm really interested. It's going to be on Doris Day, a Cincinnati young lady, and we're going to have somebody, a Doris Day woman, who's going to sing us some songs and tell you some stories about Cincinnati back then. And you know, you can have your favorite beer on the side. I think it'll be a fun class that night. With that being said, we've got a couple giveaways, so get your ticket. Oh, one thing, I saw a couple cameras out. Tonight's session is being recorded. You'll be able to watch it tomorrow at about 4 o'clock by just going to empoweruohio.org if you're interested. So with that in mind, let's bring Betty up. We've got a couple giveaways. We will get tonight started. Let's give Betty another round of applause. Thank you. And we will have our guest. So the first thing we're going to give away is we've got another World War II class on June 6th, the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And that class will be right here. And usually we don't do classes in June, but June, that's such an important event. We will be doing a class. Hope you can all come. This book is called Omaha D-Day Beach. It's a great, great book. So I'm going to ask our guests to draw a ticket.
My wife.
You're welcome. We'll see. It is number 643. 640. All right. Granddaughter. Okay, come on now. And your name is?
Jordan.
Okay, guys, give it up for Jordan here. And then the super grand prize, I'm going to have our speaker. Would you tell them about
This print represents Lieutenant Colonel Richard E. Cole's plane that he and General Doolittle flew on the Doolittle Raid 02344. This was produced by an artist, and all rights were signed over to Dick. And Dick was kind enough to sign this print, and we decided to have it wrapped off here tonight to some lucky person. And Dan was kind enough to frame it, and it's a real prize. And now, do you trust me to do that this time?
No. Okay, one more.
Carmack says.
That is number 652. 652. Who's got the ticket? 652. Right here. Okay. Let me figure out how we're going to do that. We'll do that at the end.
Okay. Nancy Brown.
Congratulations, Nancy, and I'll turn it over to Betty. And I'll turn some air conditioning on for you so we don't get all hot.
Okay, before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to, anybody that's a veteran, active or non-active, not veteran and active duty, I should say. Would you please stand? And here. Thank you all for your service. And I recognize, I don't know everybody's name, but I do recognize some faces here from the Hornet group. And I got to know the Hornet group a little over a year and a half ago because I heard about Bob Doolin and I wanted to meet him and I wanted to know his story. So I was told if I wanted to meet him, that's where to meet him, to go to that breakfast. So I did, and Bob was our speaker. Is there anybody in here that doesn't know who Bob Doolin is? Because I know we got some new people. Bob Doolin was in World War II in 1943. His plane was severely crippled and it went down in Holland. And I don't think anybody was killed when it went down, no. But he eventually, they hoped to have the Holland Underground get them to Spain, but they didn't make it. And he ended up in a POW camp for a year and a half, 2 years, 20 months. So that Bob Doolin had a fantastic story to tell us a year and a half ago. If you weren't there, we do, as we told you before, we live stream our classes and it is still online in the archives section. I encourage you to go and listen to it. And Bob turned 102 last month, so happy belated birthday. We're really glad you came out tonight. I know you'll be tired tomorrow. He comes to the Hornet breakfast too, which is early in the morning, I know, because I've been going every month too. Next, I'd like to introduce Airman Second Class Raymond G. Hughes. Intelligence Operations Airman from Petersburg, Kentucky, entered the Air Force in 1956, serving for 4 years in the USAF Intelligence School Target Planning and Survival Unit until 1960. Hughes served during the Cold War with the 8th Air Force 100 Bomb Wing Intelligence Division, primarily with Strategic Air Command. Airman Hughes continued to serve his community as an instructor at the Udon School of Self-Defense, Karate, and Judo, where he trained men, women, and children in the art of self-defense. He became a voice for veterans and one of the most respected members of the Doolittle Tokyo Raiders, where he dedicated his time and energy in making life more comfortable for other members. Raymond serves as historian and event manager for the USS Hornet Breakfast Group, conducts events for veterans at the Cincinnati-Hamilton County Public Library, and interviews veterans of all wars in collaboration with the National Archives in Washington, D.C., where he has interviewed 75 veterans to date. Twice each month, he can be found transporting veterans from Twin Towers Retirement Center to shop for personal items. Raymond is involved in the Sons of the American Revolution and takes pride in helping others trace their ancestral lineage. And on a personal note, I met Ray the same time I met Bob, and I have to say, I don't think I've met anybody who's gives more than Ray does to the veterans. He gives to the veterans all the time. You wouldn't know he was a veteran, but he is. Please give Ray a warm welcome.
Good evening, and it's a real pleasure to be here. And what a wonderful venue that Dan and Betty provide for us here. Tonight's topic will be the history of the Doolittle Raid. On 18 April 1942, 80 brave men took off from an aircraft carrier and Army bombers and bombed Tokyo, Japan, and 4 other cities in retaliation for the attack on Pearl Harbor, December the 7th, 1941. For whatever reasons, the Doolittle Raid has been indelibly imprinted on the American memory and psyche. And I just want to give you 2 quick examples before we go on with the history. I was a companion and escort for one of the Doolittle Raiders, Major Tom Griffin. And everywhere we went in the United States, I accompanied him. And he would be called to attend reunions of other outfits. And one of those outfits was the Band of Brothers. And when we walked in, the Band of Brothers all stood and gave a standing ovation. And for the next day, all they wanted to know was, what did you guys do on the raid? And how did you pull that off? The following month, we were called to the reunion for the 9th Bomb Group, which was out at Tinian. And when we got there, the same effect. They didn't talk about what the bomb runs they did. They wanted to sit for a day and a half and talk to Tom about the Doolittle Raid. Bear in mind, those guys that were in the 9th Bomb Group on March the 9th and 10th of 1945 were responsible for killing the deaths of over 90,000 Japanese. They wanted to know about the Doolittle Raid. Why? And that's a question a lot of people ask. So in telling you the history of the Doolittle Raid, first of all, I want you to remember or to know that it was not an Air Force idea. The idea of the Doolittle Raid was come up by a naval officer by the name of Francis Lowe. And on January the 10th, he was flying over Norfolk Air Station and he noticed the imprint painted on the concrete below of an aircraft carrier and saw shadows of bombers going over it. And as he was going in to land at Washington, D.C., he had been thinking, would it be possible for Army bombers to take off of an aircraft carrier? Well, he thought it might be a good idea, so he went to Admiral King. When he went to Admiral King, who was the commander of all naval affairs at that time, he was scared to death because Admiral King didn't smile at anybody. Everything was a bad idea. But he presented it to him, and he said, that's a pretty good idea, I think. Go take it to a man by the name of Donald Duncan, his chief of staff, and have him look at it. So Donald Duncan looked at the plan, and for 2 or 3 days studied it, and he came up with that it would work, but the only plane that it was feasible with was a B-25. Well, they went back to King, and he said Donald Duncan said that he agreed that it could be done. So they sent him to Hap Arnold. Hap Arnold at that point called in his chief troubleshooter, which was Jimmy Doolittle. And he asked Jimmy to plan it and see what plane could accomplish the mission, not telling him that the B-25 was already chosen. So after less than 2 days, Jimmy had a complete war plan in writing from day one to the bombing of Japan. And the plane that he chose was the B-25, the exact one that Donald Duncan had chosen. And the primary reason that the B-25 was chosen is because the bomber had to take off from an aircraft carrier. And the wingspan of the B-25 was 67 feet, 7 inches, and that would give it 6 feet of clearance to the island on the aircraft carrier. And the other wing would stick sort of along the deck edge. Now, when the Doolittle Raid took place, they had to take off in less than 467 feet. And these Air Force pilots, they were used to taking off in 2,500 feet for sure, and sometimes 3,000 feet. So I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit, and I made my card here. So on February the 2nd, Colonel Doolittle at that time ordered 2 B-25s from another outfit, not one that was going on the bomb run, to be hoisted aboard the Hornet over at Norfolk and taken out to sea to prove that they could be done. So 2 of them were taken out, and they both proved it could be done easily. Now, they weren't loaded with 500-pound bombs and the extra fuel, but nevertheless, they proved it could be done. So now we fast forward to February the 2nd. Jimmy had already made up his mind that the B-25 was a plan, and he was given orders to plan the attack. At that time, there was only one bomb group that had a full inventory of B-25s, and that was the 17th Bomb Group in Washington State and Pemberton, Oregon. So he contacted the commanding officer at that base and said, I need to have 24 planes, 24 crews. I want you to pick your best crews and then take only volunteers for a very dangerous mission. And Colonel Mills, who was the commander there, asked him what it was about. And he said, well, I can't tell you, but I need your best pilots, co-pilots, bombardiers, and navigators. So they picked the 24 crews and they flew to Columbia, South Carolina, where they sent 4 planes at a time to Minnesota. And what they had to do in Minnesota, in order to make it off of an aircraft carrier and successfully bomb Japan and escape and get to China, they didn't have enough fuel because the B-25 only held 675 gallons of fuel. So they had to have auxiliary fuel tanks installed. And he had those produced by Margin Company in Maryland and also by US Rubber. And they were shipped to Minnesota at the plant there. These auxiliary fuel tanks were installed, one in the above the bomb bay in the crawl space, coming from the pallet back to the gunner. And another one was placed over the bomb rack where the bombs were. They had to manufacture new shackles. And a third auxiliary fuel tank was placed where the bottom turret was, because they removed that. It was useless for their mission. So they ended up with a total of 1,141 gallons. Now, Jimmy, this mission has been classified, and many times they would say it was a suicide mission. Jimmy Doolittle was the master of the calculated risk. He didn't plan a mission where it was going to be a suicide mission. He had everything figured out. They were going to get within 450 nautical miles of Japan. They were going to take off. They were going to make their bomb run, go down the west coast of Japan, turn west, and skedaddle into China at Chuchao and get refueled, and then fly on to Chongqing and turn the planes over to Claire Chenot, who had the commander of the Flying Tigers. Well, that was the plan. So in the meantime, before they did take off, more training had to be done, and that was at Eglin Field in Florida. They were sent down there, and at the same day they arrived, a naval officer by the name of Hank Miller. Hank Miller was a flight instructor from Pensacola, and he had been instructed to teach the airmen how to take off in under 500 feet. And when he told these pilots that's what they were going to do, they just dropped their jaws because it wasn't possible. Well, even on the first day of training, 3 of them took off at 450 feet. And by the time that they were finished training, which was only 20 days before they went on this mission, they were doing it. One guy did it in 267 feet. So it wasn't so impossible after all. Some other adjustments were made down there and modifications at Eglin Field. And I think the 2 important ones, one, they had a Norden bomb sight on the B-25, and the Norden bomb sight in 1942 dollars cost $10,000. Plus, and it weighed a ton. And the drawback is that the Norden bomb sight was not good at dropping your bombs at 1,500 feet. It was only good at higher elevation. So an officer, Ross Greening, devised what we call the Mark Twain bomb sight. And that cost 20 cents to produce. And that, a copy, an exact copy of that bomb site is back there on the table. You can look at it before you leave. And it was set up on the table right in the nose of the plane, and the bombardier would aim it just like, and they knew what angle at 175 miles an hour at 1,500 feet to set it at, because they practiced this many times at Eglin. And most of the bombs hit their targets or close enough, like in horseshoes, you know, it counts. And another modification that Ross Greene made to the plane is they only had a nose 30 caliber gun in the nose and a 50 caliber in the top turret. So he took 2 broomsticks to use as examples and painted them black and had them sticking out the back plexiglass on the B-25. This would ward off any of the Japanese fighters be coming up, because they looked like big 50 caliber machine gun. He painted them black. Now they weren't all broomsticks. Maybe that first prototype was a broomstick. These guys don't produce something like that Mark Twain bomb site. They had wooden dowels, so let's get rid of that myth. So they arrived there on March the 2nd. On March the 20th, Jimmy got a call or a message. Tell Jimmy to get on his horse. That means get your men rounded up. We're getting ready to leave. Now bear in mind, Jimmy started planning this mission on about the 17th of January. And already we're ready to take off and bomb Tokyo. And nobody knows about it, because this is top secret and they're all warned. And I got to tell you that 2 or 3 times during this training, he never told anybody where they were going. Some of the men knew where they were going. 2 that I can tell you about, it was Major Tom Griffin from here in Cincinnati and Davy Jones, because they were sent to Washington, D.C. to select targets in the cities that Jimmy Doolittle had given them. So they did, and they were there for probably about 10 days going through charts and things that today, that's what I did when I was in the military. I plotted targets, but I knew everything that was in that country when I plotted a target. Some of these things were like the old Michelin road maps or things like that. But a couple of them were very good specimens of targets. One of them was done by Mo Berg, which maybe many people know about Mo Berg, but Mo Berg went over to Japan in 1938 with a baseball team, and he was a 3rd or 4th string catcher. Nobody could understand what the heck he was doing there. Well, what he's doing, he's going around taking pictures of all the sites. So they had their targets picked out, and that was pretty good intelligence information. So when Jimmy was told to get on your horse, they flew to Sacramento, California. Now they stopped at Sacramento because they had to tweak the airplanes, make sure nothing's wrong. If there is, we'll get it fixed here, because we're going to leave on this mission real soon. Replaced all the props on the airplanes. And then after 4 days, on April the 1st, they flew up to the Naval Air Station at Alameda, right there at San Francisco. And there were 24 crews initially when this whole thing started. 2 of the planes were destroyed at Eglin from pilots making mistakes. And those pilots did not get a crew on the mission. But Jimmy took everybody that was involved in the training, and they had to stay intact, and they were going to board the Hornet also and go almost all the way to Japan, including line technicians, mechanics, radio men. So when they got up there to San Francisco, Jimmy would walk up to the plane. He'd look up, how's it running? The guy say, well, there's a little tick here. Well, pull right over there. Well, they didn't know what the heck was going on. But everybody he sent over there, they weren't going on the mission. They parked those planes and they physically were going on the Hornet. So he ends up with 16 planes. He was only going to take 15 on the mission. Now they leave on April the 2nd, and they leave the harbor there on the Hornet, the USS Hornet CV-8. And right out, once they were out to sea, Jimmy and Commander Mitchell, the commander of the aircraft carrier Hornet, told their men where they were going. Now, of course, now about 10 or 15 of the Doolittle Raiders knew where they were going because they were involved in targets. But none of the Navy guys knew. And they really didn't have a heck of a lot of respect for airmen, you know, that inter service rivalry. But as soon as they heard they were going to bomb Tokyo, the whole relations changed with everybody. All of a sudden, the airmen were the kings. Can I do something for you? So we leave Pearl Harbor with the Hornet, 2 destroyers, 2 cruisers, 4 destroyers, and a fuel supply called a tender. And that was Task Force 16-1. At about the middle of the Pacific, they were going to meet up with Bull Halsey, who was commander of the Enterprise, with the likewise protection, 2 cruisers, 4 destroyers, and a tender. And we had to have the other aircraft carrier there because on the Hornet, there are no fighter planes. They're all below deck because all the bombers are on the deck. And if they get sighted by the Japs and attacked, they can't protect themselves. They have to just push the B-25s overboard. So that's the reason for having the Hornet escort them. And the idea was to escort them to 450 miles. Now, somewhere on April the 10th, Bull Halsey sends a message to Commander Mitchell. It was not supposed to happen. It was supposed to be radio silence, and the Japs picked up the message. And they were warned that they were going to be attacked by naval aircraft carriers. And this thing is very peculiar because they knew about where they were in the Pacific Ocean, and they knew how close they had to be to Japan to be effective, because remember, they didn't know those bombers, Army bombers, are on the aircraft carriers. So they figured they had 3, 4, 5 days. They didn't have to worry about anything because the aircraft carriers had to be closer than the 450 miles to use the Navy fighter bombers and return and land. So they were lax about this. They also didn't inform civil defense in the major cities. So now we come to April the 17th. And Jimmy realizes that they're going to have to take off early. So he calls all of his men in, and he explains to them that we're probably going to have to take off here tomorrow, because his initial plan was we're going to take off on the 19th. At night, Jimmy was carrying 4 incendiary bombs. He was going to be the first into Tokyo, drop all of his incendiary bombs and set the place on fire. And as the other planes came in behind him, a couple hours later, they'd be guided by the fires. Well, it didn't work out that way. They were sighted 650 nautical miles out. You're going to hear a lot of times people say they were 800 miles out, 600 miles out. The problem is when people are telling you how many miles, they're not talking the same measurements. The measurement of a nautical mile is different than a measurement of a statute mile. Now, let's just let it rest and say that they took off at 700 feet. I'm not going to stretch the truth. It's not necessary. What these men did, it isn't necessary to stretch the truth, but it was 700 miles, rather. So Jimmy says, there's a chance we're not going to make it. He said, we're probably going to run out of fuel. And if there's any of you guys that want to back out, this is your chance, and don't worry about it. Nothing to be said. But nobody backed out. And at this point, before we get to the actual takeoff, I would like to have our producer show you a short 10-minute video, which you'll get a feel of what these men were facing. Then we'll come back and fill in the rest of the blanks.
We flew across the United States. It took 3 or 4 days. We did low flying most of the way. We were just skimming the treetops and the fence tops.
And I'm sure we scared quite a few farmers. We buzzed their houses and scattered a few chickens and cows en route.
When we got to San Francisco, there was an order that we were not supposed to fly underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. But that made it all the more interesting for one of the pilots, and he flew his crew right underneath that Golden Gate Bridge.
We were supposed to be taken in around 400 miles from the coast of Japan. We got picked up by a picket ship at 650 miles or something out. So at that time we had to launch the gasoline or fuel. We knew we weren't going to have enough gas, but we couldn't do anything about it.
So Doolittle at the briefing that morning said, well, if it happens today we have to go, I'm going to get over Tokyo, bomb our target, bail my crew out, and then I'm going to dive my plane into the nearest good target. He would have done that.
There were several planes that had their props turning. I was very careful because at that time you had to sort of stop and wait until the carrier's deck was level so you wouldn't fall into turning prop.
I got in the airplane, they had it up to full speed, and the wind was blowing across the deck so hard you couldn't hardly stand up. So we had plenty of lift to get off.
Maybe an hour, 2 hours after takeoff, Mansky, my gunner, who was, 20 years old, called up and he said, "Sir, we don't have enough fuel." I said, "That's right." Click, end of story.
When we got to the coast, the sun was shining, Saturday, right at noon, just a beautiful day. There's a lot of people on the beach and they were waving to us. And we're flying so low I could see the expressions on their faces. They were cheering. Because we passed over them so fast they didn't see the insignia on the bottom of the right wing.
We ran into another Japanese airfield where they had fighters. And two of the fighters came right alongside of us, and I think they were trying to identify us. They didn't quite recognize us. And they were so close that I could look them right in the face, and our turret gunner started firing, and he hit both of them. One of them went into a real steep climb and started smoking, and the other sort of wobbled off. He hit both of them, but we didn't see them crash. I took a quick look out the other side, and there were two other fighters alongside us on that side. The crew hadn't noticed, so I tried to yell at the pilot and co-pilot, but my voice was gone. I couldn't speak. So I had to get out of my seat and went up and turned the co-pilot's head so he could see them.
We've had military targets and we bombed aircraft factories and oil storage tanks.
We heard from the radio that American airplanes had bombed Tokyo, and when asked President Roosevelt where they came from, where it took off from, President Roosevelt said, Shangri-La to the Chinese. They don't know where is Shangri-La.
Well, I think 4 planes ditched and 11 planes bailed out. 55 men bailed out.
Sitting in the back, they don't have a seat belt back there, just hanging on and leaning against Bombay, the back of the Bombay, and when we hit, and then that first I remember came to, and the water was rushing in the bottom of the plane, so I tried to get out there, and finally became conscious enough that realized we were upside down. Plexiglass on the turret had shattered, and that's where the water was coming in. So I was able to push open the escape hatch on the bottom of the airplane and get out there. The pilot and co-pilot were still strapped to their armor-plated seats when they came to in the water.
Your thoughts of the moment are not definitive. You just face what's going to happen to you next half hour. And I don't think you dwell on the future very much, at least when the thing's happening, you don't.
Me in particular, my pilot was one that was executed. And I faced the same tribunal, and I was ordered for execution. But somehow someone interceded, and they only executed the 2 pilots and the 1 gunner and commuted the other 5 of us to life imprisonment. And the thing that goes through my mind is, and I don't think I'll ever get an answer, why me? Why him?
I was captured later. Some of us went back to the States, joined new outfits, and in my case, I went over for the invasion of North Africa in the fall, November of '42. And I flew for Jimmy Doolittle, who's general now. I flew for him till I was shot down and captured on Sicily in July of '43. So I spent the rest of the war in a German prison camp.
Well, we wondered. We didn't know. We didn't know what had happened to them. You never know, and I'll tell you one thing, when you're locked up in a cell as big as a bathroom and you spend 2 years and 9 months in there, the first 6 months you've thought of everything you can think of, and from there on out you're a living vegetable.
We crashed on an island. It was in Japanese occupied territory, but the underground, the Chinese guerrillas were operating there, and they were able to get us out of there.
The local guerrilla leaders come to my hotel, asked me if I could speak English. I began to talk English with them. They were so glad that someone can speak English.
The torture chamber they ran us through, the way they treated us, was nothing compared to that day, wondering, and I know why some of the guys went off their trolley. You have to be real firm, you have to get a hold of yourself, you have to keep something objective in mind, but it's mighty tough. Time is a hard thing to kill. He said to me, I'm dying. And I said, you're not dying, Bob, you're just sick. And he said, yes, I'm dying. And I prayed to my God, and he's not doing me any good. Why don't you pray to your God for me? And I said, oh, come on now, you're really being a nerd. And I tried to bolster him up, and I think the best thing that happened out of the whole thing was the guard came over and he kept yelling at me to speak in Japanese, so he knew what I was talking about, because by that time we had picked up a pretty good lingo. He pulled his sword scabbard out and raped me in the ribs, It's a damn good thing you didn't have the sword out of the scabbard. I'd have got killed. And I put my fist down, it hurt. And when I drew it away, it was dripping blood. Well, I just come up off my seat and hit him on the jaw and put him on his back and broke his damn jaw. And I think that bolstered meter up more than anything else. The guards all chased around there and they were all busy seeing what went on with him. They weren't paying any attention to me. And I knew what was coming. I just turned around and walked back in myself.
Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek reported to the State Department and to the President the numbers of Chinese who had been slaughtered just because they helped the Americans pass on through their villages to get to Chongqing, which was their destination.
And then on the 21st, heard a commotion out in the hall, and I looked out through a little crack in my door, and here's about 6 or 7 GIs. I could see they were Americans. So somebody stopped in front of my door, looked in, and he said, through the crack in the door, and he says, "Are you an American?" Hell, I had a beard that hung down here. I could shake the damn lice out of it. And I couldn't talk. I hadn't talked to anybody for so long, I lost my voice. And finally they opened the door then, and he says, "He looks like an American, bring him out." So they got me out in the hallway, and he says, "Where were you captured?" And I told him, he was a pretty good sized guy, about 6'8", built about like Shaq O'Neal, who plays for the Lakers. I said, "I was with a guy by the name of Doolittle, and we bombed Japan on April the 18th, 1942. And he looked at me for a minute, turned around and looked at the rest of the troopers that were with him. He said, "You want to watch him? He's clear off his trolley. Those guys were all executed years ago." And I said, "Oh, no, we were not. There's 3 more of them right down the hall here."
You get a feel there of what it meant when they took off. Every one of them knew that there was a good possibility they weren't going to make China and were going to be forced to ditch in the East China Sea. So they all successfully bombed their targets in Tokyo. One crew, Ski York's crew, when they were just right before they dropped their bombs in Japan, the navigator said, "Ski, we don't have enough gas to even get into China Sea." And so they had to make a decision, and they flew to Vladivostok, Russia. We had been trying to get all 16 crews to land in Vladivostok, but Russia had signed a non-aggression pact with Japan, and they certainly didn't want to violate that because they had everything they could handle fighting the Nazis over around Stalingrad. So when they landed there, they were interned, and they were treated well and they were fed well. They were kept there for 14 months and shifted around all over Russia. Finally, they ended up down on the border with Persia. And conveniently, they escaped one morning 14 months later. I think the Russians wanted to make sure they got out of there and didn't create a scene where they'd have to go to war with Japan. But they were able to escape and get back safely. The other crews, 11 of them, made it to the interior of China. In the way that they made it, it was by a providential tailwind. They came up after they had come down the coast of Japan and down to the last island, and they shifted and going west towards China. They picked up a tailwind, and without that tailwind, this would have been a very different mission. As it is, 11 of them bailed out, and 4 of them had to ditch. And I want to spend a little time about one of the men crews that ditched. And I'm trying to see that clock back there. what time is it? Okay. And that's crew number 7. Crew number 7 is the crew that was highlighted in the movie 30 Seconds Over Tokyo was made about. Ted Lawson wanted to land on the coast because he was running out of fuel. And he made a circle trying to look for a good clear spot on the beach. And as he was coming back on the circle, his one engine cut out and the other engine started knocking. So he was forced to ditch. Now bear in mind, he's going 140 miles an hour, wheels down for landing he was going to try to make on the beach, and they hit the water. Well, the pilot and co-pilot in their seats were thrown through the top of the aircraft. The bombardier in the nose was thrown through the nose plexiglass, and the gunner was forced through the top of the plane too, compacting his shoulders all the way in. The injuries from this lasted to 1944 and 1943. The amount of time they spent in the hospital, but that's not the story I wanted to tell you. Young Davy Thatcher, who was a rear gunner in the rear, was knocked unconscious for just a little bit, and he came to, and the plane was upside down, so he went out to the bottom of the plane, which was the top, and was able to get to shore. Now, miraculously, somehow, all 4 of the guys were able to get to shore. But from that point on, they can't walk. The one Cleaver, his head was actually shaved all the way back. The hair was gone. He's bleeding down through all over his face, and his arm is shattered. And Davy, when he got up front, he had been given some first aid lessons, and they were told about all the disease that's rampant in China, because China, for centuries, had been using human feces for fertilizer. So there were diseases that we've never heard of were rampant there. So he made a wise decision. He didn't try to wash that blood off. He let it coagulate. So, and then the one that was hurt the worst was Ted Lawson. And Ted had deep cuts where the bone was exposed on his leg. All of his teeth, the front teeth and the bottom teeth, are knocked out. The lip is cut and hanging all the way down to here. And he's in severe pain. The other gentleman, the navigator I told you about, his arms are just crushed. He can't move his arms. Eventually they had to make casts like this, and he couldn't lay down because of the pain. His back and his hips were not broken, but completely sprained to an nth degree. So he had to sleep standing up. But all this while, young Davy Thatcher, who's 20 years old, was ministering first aid to him as best he could. And it's difficult. You know, you can't use water there. You're going to use any water, you got to find a spring that's running, and then that may not be safe. But they were lucky. When you saw the fellow there who, Mr. Tung Shin Liu, who was talking about Shangri-La, where President Roosevelt said all the doers came from. Tung Shin Liu was a college graduate. He was an aeronautical engineer, and he spoke English. He took him and helped him escape. And also, Tung Shin Liu was responsible for saving another 2 crews. But to get to the end of the story, there was another crew, Crew 15, that crash landed. And on that plane, they had a doctor, Dr. Thomas White. Well, when they were training the crews, Dr. White wanted to be on the cruise. And they told him, no, we don't have any openings for doctors. You're going to have to, we can't take you. He says, we need gunners. He says, well, I'll train as a gunner. So thankfully, they allowed him to train as a gunner, and he ended up scoring the second best score in gunnery target practice of all the crews. So Doc White ditched, and he was able, in the same locality as the Crew 7, Ted Lawson. So he had heard about it because the same natives were helping him escape, their crew escape. So they took him to the hospital where Ted Lawson and the other crews were. And when he got there, if you could believe this or not, blood transfusions were done with the syringe. He went into Griff Williams, who flew with Tom Griffin and captured with him later, draw blood in the syringe, take it over and stick it into Ted Lawson's arm and put the blood in. Draw the blood out, shoot it in. I called my personal physician the other day and he says, it can be done, Ray. He says, but I wouldn't want to do it. But he's responsible for saving his life. Later on, another day or two, the infection had set in so bad that Ted had to have his left leg amputated. He spent until 1944 in the hospital, and the co-pilot on the plane spent in 1943 in the hospital with his shoulders just so corrupted. But without Tong Shin Lu, none of them would have been alive. There's another crew I want to talk to you about. It's Crew 1, the crew that General Doolittle was flying with Robert Cole, Dick Cole as the co-pilot. They were trying to escape the Japanese also, and they were given help by different Chinese. And a fella comes down on the dock and they're hiding inside of one of those junks. And he says, are there any Americans in there? And one of the Doolittle guys, Paul Leonard, says, that must be an American. Nobody talks like that. So they came out of hiding, and it was John Birch. Now, most of you people know who John Birch is because of the John Birch Society. He wasn't part of that organization. They just took his name. John Birch was born in India and raised in Georgia and was fluent in several languages. And he was fluent in at least 2 of the Chinese dialects. And that's important because you could travel 30 miles down the road and one Chinaman can't understand the other. But he was able to help them escape, and they did escape, and no one was hurt. Colonel Doolittle was so impressed with him, and John Birch wanted to become a part of the American Army. Now, he was a missionary. I forgot to tell you that, a trained missionary. But he wanted to become a part of the American Army. And Jimmy was so impressed with him, he says, I'll talk to Claire Chenot, the head of with the 14th Air Force, and see what I can do for you. Well, he did. Claire Chenot got a hold of him and made him a lieutenant in intelligence. And he had set up such a efficient relay system that when the Japanese took off, within 5 minutes, several hundred miles away, Claire Chenot knew they took off. Those are the relay systems that the Chinese had, and they traveled just that fast. And this is not by radio. So I will fast forward here about John Birch. The surrender happened on August the 15th of 1945. And the commanding general sent John Birch on a mission to the northern part of China. And Chiang Kai-shek, the commander of the Communist Chinese, Mao Zedong, sent his men and they captured him. And they knew that he had been a spy, an intelligence agent for our side, which was Chiang Kai-shek and the United States Air Force. And they massacred him and mutilated him. And he's been identified as the first casualty of the Cold War. But the other two crews that I wanted to discuss with you is crew number 6 and crew number 16. Crew number 6 was a crew that bailed out a case of a mistaken judgment. The pilot wanted to fly inland to get as far as he could, and the navigator told him, I think you'd be better off going south and then west, because this is Japanese territory. Well, they bailed out, and 2 of the men were killed when they landed, and the other 3 were captured. So it was just unfortunate event there. And the next crew that was captured was crew number 16. They landed in the water, and 4 of the men swam to shore, and the 5th one was hurt, and they went back out and got him. But as soon as they were within 2 days, all 8 men were captured. 2 of them haven't been killed. And they spent the next 40 months being tortured in a solitary confinement, and being tortured with things that we've never heard of even today, going back to medieval times, where they stretched their bodies in all directions with a winch. Just this whole complete series. And I don't want to discuss what they did to these men, because it's actually too emotional for me to discuss at this time. I know some of these guys, and when you think about it, you hear their voices and you see their face. Like Chase Nielsen, he's got more guts than anybody I ever met in my life. He knocked him out, the guard. And normally when you knock out a guard, they're going to cut your head off. But the guy, it turns out, was so embarrassed, that's why he turned and walked out. Chase was the only one that went back for the war crime trials. And we're with his wife and my son and I. And she says, you know, that wasn't the only guy he knocked out. He said when he went back for the trials, the guard was there again, and he knocked him out again. And they arrested him, though. I mean, and I put quotes around that. You know, the big MP comes in there and he says, you're going to, so they take him into the commanding officer. The commanding officer gives him a chewing out. And he said, yes, sir, and turns and walks out. You know, he got the job done. Chase had more guts than anybody that you can read about. There's one thing that I wanted to show you. Is if we could go to Tom's check, or I can do that, can't I? Right there. I want you to see this check on the board here. Now, bear in mind, we're back to August the 17th, April the 17th, and these boys are going to take off on this mission the next day. And they're having their final briefing with Colonel Doolittle. And who comes running in but the guy who runs the kitchen? Hey guys, wait a minute. You owe me $1 a day for your food. You've been here 17 days. I mean, they're getting ready to go on a mission they're not even supposed to live through, and they want their $1 a day. So Tom had $10 in cash, and he had a $7 check, so he paid for his mess bill. But every one of the men had to pay $1 a day to the Navy for their chow. These, most of these men on the Doolittle Raid, the raid was successful, but Jimmy thought it was a failure, and because he lost 15 planes. But when he came home, he was ordered home right away. He was promoted to Major General and given the Medal of Honor, which he accepted for all the men, on behalf of all the men. The Doolittle Raid was in the papers the next day around the world. And if you heard Tung Shen Lu up there saying Shangri-La, that's why I brought this cap here with me. So he was saying they came from Shangri-La. So Colonel Cole sent this to me. I don't know if I told you or not, but for years I was a companion and escort for the Doolittle Raiders. And I was privy to a lot of private things that they did and what they experienced. But there's a couple of things I can tell you. You never heard one of them talk in a boisterous or bragging manner. They were more impressed with what the Marines did, what the infantry did, what the Navy did. They were just doing their job, and they said that to the last one passed. But I can tell you this, there was never a day in their life where they did not experience the Doolittle Raid again. All the way to 20 minutes before Tom Griffin died, I was with him, and he said to me, Ray, he woke up because he was passing away, slowly fading. He said, Ray, is the war over yet? And I said, yeah. He said, did we win? I said, yeah. He said, good, and he closed his eyes. And I want to tell you that 3 months, I had plans for tomorrow. I was to leave home at about 8 o'clock on an airplane and fly to Fort Walton Beach, Florida at Eglin Field and celebrate the 77th anniversary of the Doolittle Raid with Lieutenant Colonel Richard E. Cole. That was not to be. Dick died last Tuesday on April the 9th at about 8 o'clock in the morning at the military hospital. And you know, it's a funny thing. It's not a funny thing. There's hardly anything to be sad about. Number one, Dick was 103 years old for 7 months, and I never heard the man brag about anything. I never heard him boisterous about anything, and he was always good to people. And if you ask him something, no matter what your age, he answered the question for you. And we were asked all kinds of unique questions about the Doolittle Raid. But Dick just didn't fly on the Doolittle Raid. When it was over, they sent a bunch of them back to the United States, one being Tom Griffin, our friend. They kept Dick over in India, and he flew 80 missions over the hump, going from India to Kunming. Now, they called it the hump, the aluminum highway. And the reason why they call it the aluminum highway is because there's 960 Americans down there today. You know, you're flying in the Himalayas where you go 5,000 feet in 1 minute and down 5,000 feet in another. And those are facts. There's no exaggeration about the number. Dick never once, he said, yeah, I flew the hump. Never once did he discuss with anybody flying 80 times. So they sent him home. I got a little bit of time yet? Okay, I want to tell one more story. He comes home. They kept him over there another 9 months.
for a total of a year. And they sent him to Kansas to the, where they're producing B-24s coming off the assembly line. And his job is to quality control and check out one B-24, maybe every 10th one. Take them up in the air, fly them around, give them an okay if they're okay. So he's out there getting ready to do a pre-flight check, walking around the plane. And this young girl pulls up on her bicycle. And she says, I want to go up there with you. And Dick says, well, I'm sorry, we can't take civilians up there. You know, it's prohibited. He said, well, I just work across the road there in the other factory. He said, it doesn't matter, you can't go. So he goes on around, finishes his flight check. He gets in the plane. And I don't want to exaggerate, but I'd say they're up at about 8,000 or 9,000 feet. And he feels something. And he looks over his shoulder, and there's that girl. And I have pictures of her. As a matter of fact, I have one in my pocket, quite by accident, thanks to Jill. And he sees her. And he says, oh my God. So he has to go back and land. So he lands, and he says, you know, well, the co-pilot interrupts him, and he looks at the girl, and he says, you know, we're going to have to report this, and they may want to investigate this. So he pulls out one of them paper match pads, and he says, put your name and number or telephone number on there for me, and I'll call you. So she writes down her name, she writes down her phone number, the co-pilot's sitting there, and she gives it to Dick Cole. It gets better. Dick is bashful. He's a true gentleman, but he's really bashful. He waits 2 weeks and calls her on the phone. So they go on a date. 2 weeks later, they get married. Now, they went to a Catholic priest, and they wouldn't marry him because Dick wasn't Catholic, and his wife was. So they go to the justice of peace and get married. Dick is immediately called, after they got married, to get into a new outfit called the 1st Air Commandos. Going to be a new behind the lines outfit. So they go to the base where they're going to train, and he talks to the chaplain, and the chaplain says, we'll marry you. So within the course of another 2 weeks, Dick is married twice. And they stay married their whole lives. It's just one of those stories about Dick. He was so bashful, he went car for 2 weeks. Lucky somebody else didn't get her. And so Dick then leaves his new wife, and he goes back, and he's part of the 1st Air Commandos. Now, the 1st Air Commandos were fighting out of India and in Burma. And their objective was, anybody remember Terry and the Pirates, the comic strip? That was done by Milton Caniff. That whole comic strip is Air Commandos. And that's, and Dick Cole was part of that. And Dick is the Dayton Kid in that series. He's mentioned once or twice. But what Dick was doing there is they were flying C-47s and towing an airplane. And in that airplane they're towing would be infantrymen, or the next time it'd be full of mules, the next time it'd be full of bulldozers. And they were flying behind Japanese lines and setting up bases to attack the Japanese from the rear while their army's coming from the front. And at one time, on one of the last missions that this was ever done, Dick Cole was towing two aircraft at the same time. Now that's a quick way to commit suicide, for sure. And at the end of that mission, that was never done again. But throughout his life, that's what Dick did, and you'd have to pull it out of him if you wanted him to know it. And so I wasn't able to, I'm not going to be able to meet Dick tomorrow and have 2 fingers of scotch with him as we planned, but I enjoyed his life, and he was a patriotic and a good American.
Pardon me.
We're going to take a few questions. When we come around, if you would be kind enough to say your first name and speak into the microphone for our guests online. And we do have one special drawing at the end of tonight. So when you sit back down, if you're a veteran, would you please raise your hand and Jill's going to pass you out a ticket. And also, I forgot to do my duty. Empower You is a free university. If you could put a buck or two, we'd always appreciate it. Who has a question for our great guest? Right back here, Mr. Ken Bowman.
I'll get you.
Ray, thank you so much. I've come to quite a few of these meetings. I think this is the first time we've ever had a standing ovation, but you did a great job. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing that story about how Dick met his wife, Dick Cole met his wife. It's just kind of a unique story.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to share the story of Sam DeShazer and how he survived the Japanese camp and went on to become a missionary in World War II?
I knew you were going to ask that question, and my wife cautioned me not to answer the question. But I'll try. And if I can't finish, I'll try out of honor to the Doolittle Raiders. The last 11 months that the men were captured in Japan, before that they were tortured every day for 30 months. And when I say tortured, I mean the body stretching, waterboarding, hanging by your wrist, deprived of food, and held in solitary confinement. Well, after one of the men that was being confined died of malnutrition and beriberi, Japanese, one of the guards got a heart or something, or maybe God directed him. I don't know. There's a whole lot of God going on here from now on. He gave the boys a couple of books, and one of them was the Holy Bible. Now, Jacob DeShazer, his father was a missionary, a preacher, and Jake was the son of a preacher who went to church occasionally. On the trip, he didn't go to the services on Easter Sunday, and it just ate at him. But he started reading the Bible, and he started reading it through and through and through, and memorizing these passages. And Jake had a voice come to him. And I believe this. And the men believe it. And I'm going to try to get through this. Because when you know these guys and you hear their voice and you see their faces, it does get emotional. But he heard a voice, and it told him to start praying. And keep praying until I tell you to stop. And he started praying. He was praying for hours, praying 4 hours. He said, "It's okay now, you can stop. The war's over." And it was August the 9th, 1945. He had no way of knowing the war's over. He had no way of knowing the second atomic bomb. He didn't know about the first one. He had no way to know about that. And you can believe what you want. But he made a promise to God there. If he lived, he was going to go back to Japan and preach the gospel. So he gets discharged when they're rescued, which is a bizarre story in itself. So he goes home and he does go to seminary, and he graduates from a Free Methodist seminary. I have no idea what a Free Methodist is, but they're a part of a segment of the Methodist state. And he goes back to Japan and he starts proselytizing to the Japanese people, preaching the word of God. Salvation is only through Jesus Christ. And he's converting Japanese to Christianity. And then one of the most weirdest things that only happens in movies, on December the 7th, 1941, the commander of all Japanese fighters that attacked Pearl Harbor, and he led all the fighters coming in. The first to strafe and drop bombs at Pearl Harbor was a man by the name Commander Mitsuo Fushida, F-U-C-H-I-D-O. At one of the rallies, just like Billy Graham did, Bushido signs his life over to Jesus Christ and Christianity.
We've got a question right here.
Ray Dennis, I was wondering if you could tell us the military value versus psychological value of the attack on Tokyo, and like, for example, how many bombs were actually dropped?
Well, there weren't that much. You got to remember, as far as physical damage that these guys did, most of the planes only had 3 bombs and 1 incendiary bombs. So if you take and say they had 4 times 16, that's only 64 bombs. 4 times, that's correct, and that's 64. And there wasn't a great deal of damage done in a physical manner, but there was a heck of a lot of damage done in a psychological manner and a moral manner. Because up until that time, the United States was down in the dumps. The radio shows, the newspapers, they're crying to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do something, we're getting killed everywhere. You know, the Japs, by that time, had captured 140,000 men at Singapore. Our men in the Philippines were captured before the raid of 70,000 men. And they were getting ready, they'd captured New Guinea, and they're getting ready to invade Australia. So after the Doolittle Raid, this all turned around because the Japanese people started questioning their leaders, and even in a subtle manner questioning the Hirohito, the emperor. And a lot of people lost face, and there's nothing worse than losing face in the Japanese country.
We've got a question right back here.
Ray, I just wonder if you might want to tell the people what some of these framed things are around. Ray brought in all this stuff, so I think they'd like to know what it represents.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Of course, the uniforms, some of them are self-explanatory, him being a tech sergeant, but that particular uniform back there came from a fellow that was in the 106th Division, and he was captured at the Battle of the Bulge. And I don't know anything more than the fact of that, and how people's children and grandchildren can sell stuff like this is beyond me. This map here, this is a map of China, and what it does, it shows where each one of the crews bailed out, and I had the boys sign it, and it's a priceless piece in my home. That particular banner there shows all 16 crews, and it shows Dick Cole's plane again, and Dick signed it. And underneath of this, or somewhere else, is another banner with just Dick Cole. I like, it's such a pleasure to honor Dick. He was so good to us. And back there, I think I'll bring that forward to show everybody. Thank you, Joe. How much time we got? About 20 minutes. As I told you before, they had a Norden bomb sight on the B-25. They cost $10,000, but it wasn't effective until you were at higher altitude. And Ross Greening developed this bomb sight and called it the Mark Twain for 20 cents. And this is what they used to aim. And they would set it at the prearranged angle. These bombardiers had already practiced enough at Eglin Field. They knew at 1,500 feet, going 160 miles an hour, 175 miles an hour, what the time lapse was, and when they came into the sight to flip the toggle and drop the bomb. And an ingenious thing, and it worked pretty good. I wouldn't say it worked 100% of the time, but it's like in horseshoes and hand grenades. close is good enough.
Good time for one or two more questions. Who's got one of our, yeah. Okay.
Oh no, this is beautiful. This is one I had made. You know, this is a picture of only Crew 1 and with Richard Cole. And you know, I wasn't going to bring this one out here this time, but my gosh, it's so appropriate now with Dick having passed last Tuesday. And you know, ordinarily you're really sad and want to cry and bawl a little bit when one of your best friends die. But man, I'm so happy that he even knew him, let alone I was a friend. And he'd send me a care package every once in a while. And by a care package, I mean valuable documents or a print, you know. He just felt that he knew I would keep it, and I don't sell anything. I might give you something, but I ain't selling nothing. And this is just a beautiful, beautiful banner. And a friend of mine gave one too. He's had his framed and put it in his manhole. And it looks gorgeous, a lot more gorgeous than mine.
Questions? We've got maybe time for one last question. Is that one back there? Right here.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Dennis Yavorsky here.
Why?
Yes, you mentioned that the Doolittle Raid had a psychological effect, but wasn't it more profoundly strategic? It brought the Japanese back towards the home islands and precipitated the Battle of Midway, where they lost 4 carriers and their strategic reach in the entire Pacific. I'm sure that the politicians didn't plan it that way, but it sure turned out well, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Because they had been thinking about attacking, invading Midway Island before the Doolittle Raid. It was actually in the planning stage, but it was a question of when they were going to do it. And like us having to attack with the Doolittle Raid to show that we're doing something, and all these losses we got, they were forced to move their schedule up by a considerable time. And fortunately, we broke the code and were able, and that's another fortuitous event. You know, there's a lot of God-given direction in the victory there. Believe me, I believe in, if you don't believe in God intervening at times, sometimes you can't read Midway.
So Ray, Nancy Brown, right there in the brown sweater, won this tonight. She was the winner. She decided she wanted to give it to a vet. So one of our veterans. So would you be kind enough to draw one more ticket? And we will, it cannot be. It can't be you. Okay, so this has a very select group. We're looking for number 582. Right there.
Outstanding.
That's close. And sir, would you tell us your... Okay, we're going to do a redraw on that. We had some miscommunication. We'll try one more. Let's try one more.
All right, this time I'm going for.
Thank you, sir. 594. 594. 594. You got it right up there, sir. All right, thank you. Congratulations, thank you. And we'll get you this at the end. So, hey, what do you say? Let's thank our guest one more time for all the time he put in, all the work he did. What an incredible class. Thank you so much. And I'm sure that if you want to get your picture taken up front here, we'll be glad to help you do that. So thank you so much for coming to Empower You tonight. It was great seeing such a great crowd. We hope to see you next Tuesday for our presentation on Child of the Forest, a discussion about the Holocaust. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.